The decade-old recording of a majority party presidential candidate lewdly describing the license to engage in sexual assault that he thinks his fame grants him was shocking enough. But in the aftermath of the tape's release, even more shocking has been the dexterity with which political and religious right leaders have managed to dismiss those remarks. For those of us who are skeptical of the religious aspect of the religious right, that may be less surprising. But what about the followers of those leaders, particularly evangelical women? For a look at this painful issue, I'm pleased to be joined by the Reverend Jennifer Crumpton, author of the book Femmevangelical. Jenny, welcome back to State of Belief Radio.
Thanks so much for having me, Reverend Gaddy, and thank you for talking about this important issue.
Well, I've been reading this week about several prominent women evangelical leaders expressing hurt and disappointment that their male counterparts have found ways to excuse Donald Trump's outrageous statements. I'm really eager to hear your take on this. Give us an overview right off.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me start by saying that if this is locker room talk that Trump was doing, then we should be closing down every locker room in the country right about now. And, you know, it's funny because actually a lot of athletes have come out, particularly via Twitter lately, and said, this is actually not what happens in locker rooms.
Yes.
One of the players for the Chiefs, pro athletes, college athletes have all been coming out and saying this is absolutely not true. And Trump calling this locker room talk is actually very offensive to us.
Of course.
You know, look, I think I'm really happy that a lot of prominent evangelical women have been coming out and standing up to their counterparts in the evangelical world. I mean, we've seen Ralph Reed, we've seen so many others who are extremely influential conservative evangelicals coming out and saying, you know, it's our duty to vote for Trump. This was just talk. This was a long time ago. And, you know, technically they condemn what Trump said, but then they go on to support Trump fully and wholeheartedly. And at Liberty University, President Jerry Falwell Jr. actually, you know, told the students, look, it's your duty to vote for Trump. So I think what so many evangelical women are extremely upset about is that, once again, women's lives and our safety and our well-being get completely swept under the rug. There's some talk, there's statements about condemning what Trump said, no women should be talked about this way, etc. But then when it ultimately comes down to it, when push comes to shove, they're still going to completely support Donald Trump, even though he clearly stated in unequivocal terms, self-confessed, he's a sexual predator. Because really Trump's remarks, if you look at them closely, they're not just words. He's actually talking about actions, specific actions he took toward and against women in the recent past. So, you know, the fact that he was newly married, you know, that's a twist to it as well that you would think that a lot of evangelicals would be upset about because, you know, that's often a big issue that they stand behind is family and fidelity, etc. But the real issue is that Donald Trump was promoting and has confessed to be engaging in sexual assault in the past. So, you know, what leaders like Ralph Reed and Jerry Falwell Jr. are doing is basically, particularly in the case of Liberty University, telling young men that it's absolutely fine to sexually assault women. That's the message that they're promoting. And that young women, you just might as well go ahead and expect it because even the most powerful men in the world are going to do it as well, and we're going to just let it slide.
Jenny, is it fair to say that this is actually a visible expression of a tension that's been simmering for a long, long time in many evangelical circles?
Oh, yeah. I think that's really well said, Reverend Gaddy. Absolutely. And I write about this in my book, Femmevangelical, The Modern Girl's Guide to the Good News, because in my mind, this goes all the way back to the development of Christian theology. And it's also a product of American Christian doctrinal changes, particularly with the moral majority, where getting a Republican into the White House or into Congress or whatever may be the case is much more important than the actual lives of women or any vulnerable minority within our country, for that matter. Mm-hmm. But particularly with women, I actually have a piece that's going to come out in Time later this week, and in it I talk about the fact that ignoring and dismissing such violence, it's actually, to me, one of the consequences of this implicit conservative Christian belief that women were created secondarily by God. Mm-hmm. So, that is sort of a tenet of doctrine and Christian theology that is taken from Genesis and interpreted in a certain way that gives men God-given authority over women's bodies, creation, children, dominion over everything. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that this is one of the reasons our society still does not take sexual assault seriously, is because we're truly still not looked at as equals when it comes to evangelical conservative circles. And I don't want to lump all evangelicals into that, because certainly not all self-professed evangelicals believe that. But when it comes to this conservative group that's supporting Donald Trump, that's very much a big part of their history, not allowing women to have certain roles within the church and only allowing us to have certain roles within society, making decisions for us about our bodies and our reproductive health and our well-being without consulting us. Yeah. We saw those all-male birth control panels back in 2012. And, this is a long-standing, deeply entrenched issue within the evangelical community. And, over the course of the decades, they got away with just sweeping it under the rug, mm-hmm. with just giving it talk, saying, oh, well, we do condemn this kind of stuff, But then ultimately what we want to see is action. We want to see definitive action that proves that the freedom and equality of women is just as important as ISIS or the economy or, any of the other issues. Abortion, in particular, is a very offensive part of what Ralph Reed was talking about. He said, we have a duty to vote for Trump because he's the anti-abortion ticket, which is questionable, as we all know, from Donald Trump's history of actually supporting abortion. But since he's pandering to this community, saying he will repeal Roe versus Wade, he'll appoint Supreme Court justices that will tear it down. It's very interesting that abortion was the number one issue that Ralph Reed brought up as to why people should be voting for Donald Trump, when Donald Trump is somebody who is a sexual predator who mm-hmm. destroys women's lives.
Jenny, I have a hunch, and I want to just say it to you because me saying it would not be as credible as a woman saying it, if it is what you believe too. I can't understand these men, particularly, not seeing that what they're doing to win a political election is down the way going to compromise the way women experience Christian worship, Christian mm-hmm. faith, the kind of morality that a Christian man has when women are being swept aside or worse, abused by this. What I'm getting at is, look, is their politics for them more important than sustaining the integrity of the Christian gospel and the way that Christian churches reach out to all people, including women? Or am I just wrong about that?
Oh, no, I think you're absolutely right. And again, to your point earlier, I think this is something that goes way back because, Pew polls and various studies have shown over the past few years that women have been leaving the church in droves. Mm-hmm. The numbers of women committed to the Christian church or the Evangelical church, but even more broadly, just the Christian church, has been dwindling very quickly, especially among young women. And it's because, younger women just aren't willing to take this anymore. They mm-hmm. see it as extremely hypocritical. They see the political loyalties as extremely damaging, and they aren't able to trust the church. The other night on CNN, conservative commentator Kayleigh McEnany was arguing on behalf of Trump that she didn't see anybody as irredeemable because everyone's forgiven in Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the American people should forgive Trump of this sin and continue to support him. And what she's doing is actually supporting what has been one of the major downfalls of the Christian church in my eyes, which is to put politics first, particularly in just the last few decades, sweep things like this under the rug, and allow abuse to continue unmitigated because they aren't going to challenge powerful men who can sway the political framework in the direction they want to go with, mm-hmm. Which has been Republican. So, what she doesn't say in that statement is that forgiveness, I think the Christian church has had a lot of problem with what the outcome of forgiveness should actually be. Forgiving Trump for saying this or doing this or whatever, I mean, that's everybody's prerogative on their own timeline and depth of thought around the issues. But believing that Christian forgiveness means that you have to still have a duty to vote for Trump, naively and foolishly putting him into the highest office in the world, that has just led to continued unmitigated abuse for decades, if not centuries. Mm-hmm. So I do think this absolutely affects women and girls, how we feel when we walk into a church, the level of trust that we have for our religious faith, mm-hmm. And, whether it serves us well. We're so often taught, you're here to serve the church, you're here to serve God, it's not about you. There's a lot of Christian tenets about self-sacrifice that really apply to women only mm-hmm. in mm-hmm. a lot of ways, or has been applied that way. And so oftentimes women who have been raised in the church, we're made to feel, and I'll say this is absolutely my experience personally, we're made to feel like we're just supposed to allow it. Mm-hmm. Because this is the church talking. These are the leaders, who represent Jesus Christ on earth, talking, and they must know what's right, and we're supposed to just, sort of grin and bear it and endure it and not say a whole lot about it. Mm-hmm. But that's just not really cutting it anymore with women. And I think the more that we're gaining our voices in society at large, the mm-hmm. more we're unwilling to accept this kind of stuff from our faith tradition.
Have you given thought, and I'm almost positive you have, to some possible lessons or strategies that we could learn from this episode? I mean, the what he said is not going away, and we're probably going to hear some more of that before Election Day. What should faith leaders be saying about this right now?
It's a good question because we're actually very unprepared for this moment, sadly. As a general faith community, there are a lot of issues around social justice that we work on together. But when it comes to women's safety and security, there hasn't really been as much of a concerted, cohesive effort to be prepared for situations like this to come up. What I think that faith leaders should be talking about is the reality on the ground. We need to be talking about the fact that 1 in 5 women in the United States is sexually assaulted in their lifetimes. I mean, is that really the land of the free? Are we really living in a free country? Do we really have freedom, or are women still second-class citizens in that we're expected to accept language and behavior, and we're expected to have criminal activity perpetrated against us without people believing us, or without, people actually caring that it's happening on a regular basis? We need to talk about, as faith leaders, the fact that violence against women matters, that words matter, that, who we are in our hearts, by our words, you can judge a man's heart. That's in Scripture, that we're not going to allow political spin to convince us otherwise anymore, that we're going to take people at their word. We've been talking about Trump's history with women and what he says about them and how he behaves with them for over a year now, since he's thrown his hat into the ring for the presidential campaign. But why weren't we talking about it before? Why is a man who has had his face on the cover of Time magazine, or who has been covered by the media more than most any other businessman in history, who was developing his own PR back before he was really famous, by calling up journalists and talking about his affairs and, how he could have any woman he wanted. And, why does our society let this go on so long? That should be a big question that faith leaders are raising. And I think we have to be careful, because obviously we want to use our faith voices, and we want to use terminology that's grounded in our faith traditions in order to argue against what's happening right now with the support of Trump. However, we have to be more accessible to secular society as well, because we need secular society's help with this issue. We can't cut ourselves off from the rest of society saying we're the church and we're going to talk this way about it and we're going to handle it this way. We have to partner with mainstream and secular organizations who have been doing grassroots work on the ground for so long. There's a sexual assault survivors bill of rights in Congress right now that's actually being pretty successful. Why wasn't it the faith community, that put that into Congress? Why have we never taken real concrete action? And I think it's time for us to really do that. And, if once the presidential campaign sort of is over, which I think we're all really looking forward to this year, we can't let this blow over. We have to really get organized around this issue and really carry it forward. Once Trump is potentially out of the media again, or if he indeed is sitting in the Oval Office, we can't just say, well, it's over, it's done. We really have to have a concerted effort to stop this.
Jennifer, I need to stop right now because of our time, but I've got to ask you one other question, and I don't have but about 2 minutes to ask, but I've got to ask you, if you're looking in the face of a 13-year-old girl who just heard what Donald Trump said, and you see the expression on her face of not knowing what to think, what do you say to that young girl?
I would say do not believe it.
Yeah.
Just because he's a man and just because he's powerful, he is no more important than you. Actually, Reverend Gaddy, I'm pregnant, and I am going to be delivering a baby girl in January. And I think all the time about what I'm going to tell her when she gets old enough, because she's being born into a country where it is absolutely 100% fine and even expected that she is going to get demeaned and sexually assaulted. And, I think constantly about how I'm going to explain this to her and how I'm going to teach her to be self-possessed enough to not cow to these dynamics and these realities that she's going to face in the world. And, so I would say to her, and I would say to this 13-year-old girl you're describing, do not accept it. You do not have to accept it. And the problem is the church has never told us that. Faith leaders never tell us that. And that's what I would say. Do not accept it. Do not believe for a minute that just because there are powerful men saying this, that it's true. And do not believe that you have to tolerate this, and you can do something about it.
Jennifer D. Crumpton is the author of Femmevangelical, the Modern Girl's Guide to the Good News. She earned a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary, and she was ordained by Park Avenue Christian Church in New York City, a public speaker at the intersection of politics, social justice, religion, and popular culture. She has appeared on numerous television programs and writes for Pathos and Huffington Post. Jennifer is the founder of Femmevangelical.com and Faith Not Fear 16. Jennifer, it's always great to talk with you, but today especially because we needed to hear your voice, your faith-based voice about something that has gripped our nation. And so thank you so much for being with us on State of Belief Radio.
Thank you, Reverend Gaddy. It's always a pleasure.